A new documentary is releasing very shortly, a film called Hinckley. I Shot the President, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer-director of Hinckley, Neil McGregor. Neil, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Peter, it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Good to talk to you. And I was so intrigued by this film about Hinckley's attempt to assassinate Ronald Reagan in 1981. How did the documentary come about and that you were able to gain Hinckley's trust to be part of the documentary?
Like all great stories, they find you in the weirdest of ways, the oddest of ways. And for this one, I was making a documentary film, Growing Happiness, and it was about sunflowers. I was researching some music for a particular scene, and I needed something that had that progressive Bob Dylan folksy sound to it. And I saw a YouTube algorithm, and there was a cover by John Hinckley on there. I thought it's actually a really good song, like a great cover. And I thought, why do I know that name? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I searched it and I kind of thought, wow, how does someone go from being obsessed with the movie Taxi Driver, stalking Jodie Foster, to trying to assassinate the US president in 1981 to becoming a musician and trying to move on from their life and decouple from their past? That just seemed like such a fascinating story to tell. I reached out to John Hinckley to sort of say I'd love to make a documentary, talk about obviously the music and the art that he's doing now, but you can't tell the present without the past. He liked the approach of the creative vision, and we sort of spoke over, a sort of few months on and off, and we set some filming dates, and Screen Queensland were fantastic, who came on board to give us some development funding to get things kickstarted, and the film was born, and we went over and made the film. Three Australians knocked on John Hinckley's door and spent sort of 6 weeks with him there, that first batch of filming, to spend time with him and just getting to share his story. And with trust, it's earned, that rapport you build. And that was just done over time and filming. And he opened up all kinds of different parts of his life. And as a documentarian, you get to step into people's lives. And John Hinckley showed himself as that vulnerable person and spoke about some very uncomfortable things of his past and actions that he did in that unwell state of mind. And he, just allowed that vulnerability in us to sort of share his story that way.
How interesting. As I was watching the film, I was so intrigued as to whether there were any occasions when Hinckley said, I've got to stop. I can't talk about this. This is something that, I can't mention in the documentary. Were there any sort of boundary issues that came up?
No, obviously with him, with his mental state, Lisa Becker, the producing partner, she's got a background in a master's in criminology and forensic mental health. So we set out some barriers of just mental health filming, safety rails for us. And I think that was important to give him comfort to talk about those things, but also make sure that we as the filmmakers were doing it in the right, respectful way. For anything that John Hinckley was not willing to talk about or didn't want to talk about, or did want to talk about, there was nothing that was not on the table to be discussed. And I think that's probably speaks volumes to earning that trust and rapport. Maybe the only thing he didn't like us talking as much about was being pen pals with Ted Bundy. That was probably the thing where he's like, I'll talk about it. I don't like to talk about it, but it's something that I don't think anyone would want to be associated with, even someone like John Hinckley with his past.
Okay, again, very interesting. And his association, in inverted commas, with Jodie Foster and the whole taxi driver issue that comes up, and his interest in Travis Bickle, and then with Jodie in particular. Um, getting Obviously she was involved in the documentary, and she denied that she ever knew Hinckley and all that sort of thing. But I wonder if that was crossing a few boundaries.
For him to talk about that, or the film to sort of cover those topics in the conclusion?
Pretty much both, because Jodie was sort of caught in the middle of it all.
Completely so, and she obviously doesn't like to talk about it, and it's very rare to see interviews where it is discussed. For us, the filmmakers, to share that story, it was important to present things that were just factual, that were out there, uh, not having an opinion one way or another. So the way of doing that is also important to have a level of respect of the lives that John Hinckley's actions impacted. Obviously he shot four people outside the Hilton
Mm.
Hotel in 1981. Those people's lives and those families were impacted. James Brady, one of those who was impaired his whole life as a result of John Hinckley's actions while he was in a poor state of mental health at the time. But it's also important to recognise that Jodie Foster was completely unrelated to any of this. She
Mm.
had nothing to do with it outside of her control, and obviously traumatized by those events as well. She was very young at the time, and it's important to cover those things and show the level of respect of to the victims of those actions. So it was always important to make sure that it was handled in the right, respectful way and share those as they were, and really show the impact that the things you can do when your mental health is poor.
Yes, exactly. I was wondering also, in terms of financing, getting support for making this documentary, because dealing with someone like Hinckley, who is, he did attempt to assassinate the president. Um, were there any issues in getting that support to make the film?
Uh, it was certainly a challenging approach to it. It is interesting because obviously the story itself just spurs fascination. So we had a very strong market interest, but the way documentaries are made is that you have to essentially go out and make the film, almost self-financing it, to be able to get distributors and things on board. Uh, we had a lot of interest. We had some offers, but really they all wanted us to take all the risk, fund it all essentially, and then they would sort of take on the project, and in many cases not provide, I think, a financial remuneration for the risk and levels that you have to take to make it, and that money doesn't trickle back. We were very, very blessed to have Screen Queensland's support. I took this project to them and said to them, look, this is the project. We'd love some development funding just to sort of see if this is anything. And I got to say, huge credit to Screen Queensland that this film would not be possible without their support. Getty Images were on board early too, helped us go through a lot of the archival, which is a very creative decision that you would see in the film, to see how we could get those clearances and make sure that we're able to use that particular footage. And that's also part of the reason why we've released it on our own platform, because when a lot of people were interested in the film but didn't want to put the dollars down, and interestingly, when Trump was involved in that incident, we had a lot of interest coming back to us. But I thought, well, we've already taken all the risk. We've told the story. The authentic story is the one that you see in the film. That's impacted as an authentic story to share, not a streaming platform that's more concerned about their share price than perhaps their stories that they want to sort of, to share the right way. So we created our own platform and direct to consumer model that is, I think, a potential to disrupt and change how people are consuming content, and the streaming platforms and the way people are consuming content and digital economy is rapidly changing. So we thought, well, why not
Mm.
do it in a different way when we can, zag when everyone else zigs.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the archival footage, because I was impressed with the footage that you were able to use, especially the US in the 80s, and Hinckley retracing his steps when he went to Hollywood, to New York, and various places, and just trying to get to grips with his state of mind, which was obviously not necessarily very clear, which I found fascinating. So putting all that together into a cohesive narrative with him narrating or talking about his experiences, that must have been quite a challenge.
It was certainly a challenge, but it was a fun jigsaw puzzle to put together. We had a fantastic post-production team. Getty Images helped us with a lot of research, turning up things that people hadn't seen before. We approached it that way creatively because it just felt like that was the right way to really set the tone and the feeling of the era that was all happening. So Navaz and Jordan, the two editors who we worked together many late nights and over a duration of time to craft that, because we wanted to really put the audience in that, not only in John's mind frame and how his emotion and moment of the time, but also paint what the era was like. You know, that there's that kind of nostalgia. That sort of late 70s, a very different sort of era, and even like the 80s is a very kind of more starker kind of thing. So an idea was to do reenactments like you see in a lot more sort of more true crime type things, but we thought, why not do something just a little bit different? And when we sort of saw some of this amazing archival footage there, it just felt the right way to do it. And it was just a complex jigsaw piece to pull together, but it really made it something different for what it is. And when you get to the present day stuff with John, it really sort of shows that story of time passing, which, you know, and then some of the things of the past keep repeating or have remained unresolved. I think that becomes a more poignant and even more powerful sort of statement for the audience to kind of grasp.
Yes, yes. I mean, obviously Reagan survived. He didn't have any major issues. However, James Brady, I think it was, who I think became a paraplegic when he was after he was shot, something like that. His story is also quite interesting. I suppose you didn't want to spend a lot of time with Brady and the impact that the attempt to assassinate Reagan had on him.
It was, Brady was one of those things where it was important to cross over and include in as much as we could. Obviously, John Hinckley's life is fascinating in so many ways. The impact that it had on James Brady, who was the White House secretary, who was walking out the hotel next to Reagan and was shot in the head. He was survived. He was impaired a certain level of paralysis for the rest of his life, and you know his family dealt with that. He dealt with that, and you know John Hinckley is very remorseful for those actions that he did. His death in 2014 was ruled as a homicide as a result of the injuries he sustained in 1981 during the assassination attempt. You know, so it was important to include that as a part of it. There was also two other people injured, a Secret Service and a police officer, Delahunty and McCarthy, who were also injured during the incident. But what maybe a good thing to come out of a bad situation is the Brady laws became a part of this, and that decreased gun violence in America uh, in a profound sort of way. And that's obviously something that's still America wrestles with in a unique way quite daily. So there are some things that still haven't done, but it was important for us to make mention and show respect to the victims of those directly impacted, like Ronald Reagan and James Brady and Delahunty and McCarthy, but also Jodie Foster, who was indirectly impacted, and John in a different sort of way of unchecked mental health and not being widely understood at the time, that allowed these sorts of events to transpire the way that they did.
Yes, yes, exactly. No, certainly you bring that to the fore. I was quite gobsmacked because at the time, in 81, Hinckley pleaded not guilty when obviously the evidence was everywhere, that on camera everywhere, that he had shot the gun and so on. So at the time there was a defense where you could say guilty, not guilty due to insanity. which I gather had been changed after that trial. But I was quite intrigued by that. I thought, my goodness sake, I mean, of course he is guilty.
And I think he even says it in paraphrasing, but it was there for the world to see. It was captured by three cameras who were standing next to him. You can actually see his hand when he's pulling the trigger there. Uh, it is, and I think that really does speak to just how unwell his state of mind was at the time. His it's not quite in there, but one of the things that he was on the day that he shot the president was about Valium. He was worried about where he was going to get his next hit of Valium. Mental health at the time was not understood as widely it is now, and even now it's still a complex thing that people don't fully grasp or even recognize. If someone walked down the street, they have their a bandage on their wrist or something, you can sort of connect those dots. But if you don't have mental health, you can't see it. It's difficult for people to understand. So for him to plead, reasons of insanity, and that was what the jury found too. It changed the legal system in the States. The insanity defense is actually something that's only in a few states in the US that's actually still something. So his actions there and that verdict actually changed the course of the legal system in the US in a very, very profound way.
Yes, yes. And in fact, the insanity defense is not so much for the trial, but for the sentencing. That comes in afterwards. Yeah, yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, now all this wonderful material, Hinckley's narration, his music, which is something he sees as being very significant to his life, etc. All of that footage and everything that you shot, how easy was it to make the final edit? And secondly, how was Hinckley involved, if at all, and how he responded to the final version of the film?
Yeah, the he was paid $1 for this just from a legal standpoint for it, and I think that really speaks to him how he wanted to share that story in the truest sort of sense of just him as he was. He had no say in the post production, which was done all here in Australia, and we crafted that editorial control. So when we shared it with him, he feels it's a very good representation of who he is. A very humanized person of the difficult things that he's done in his past and the challenges that he's faced, but also the him moving on from his past with his music and art now. So it's always a nerve-wracking thing as a filmmaker to share a film. I always think that it's a important thing to share the movie at the end of it. And he enjoyed the film and had a lot of respect for how it was told. To actually craft that jigsaw piece of his music and his art, it was very difficult to jam his whole life story into 90 minutes. You've got to have the pace and the flow and the audience journey of those 90 minutes. Like that's very story structure kind of things that you have to place in there. So chronologically, that made sense to share it that way, and that's the film, the documentary that you see. But what gave us a level of comfort by releasing our own platform is that to cut scenes that just didn't quite make the film or was on the cutting room floor, it was something that gave us comfort to pull those key scenes out if they just didn't quite fit the edit, but still important to include. So we've included them in the platform to be able to consume, because a true crime documentary you watch, you will very quickly be on the internet going down the rabbit hole of trying to find more. So what we've done is pulled all of that together, and that user experience is much like when people used to go to a Friday night to watch a DVD and you watch the film, but there's deleted scenes and other things that are included in it. So we've also pulled FBI case files and things that no one has seen before. And I think it's a really rich tapestry to be able to kind of pull those things and share not just the story that's in the film, but also so much more that is John Hinckley as a person and the impact that he had on the world.
Yes, yes, exactly. Quite significant it was too. Okay, so how will the documentary now be rolled out so that people can have a look at it and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. The August 30 is how it's going to be released, is the date, and it's on Hinckley.movie. So you can look at it on your phone, your laptop, your tablet. You can put it on the internet on your TV as well. So Hinckley.movie, it's its own platform, like a streaming platform you go to. And you pay a high fee and you can access all the content and watch the film.
Ah, that's great because I'm sure a lot of people will want to see it. It's there's so much intriguing information in the film, and it's interesting, Neil, that you mentioned another documentary that you made because I noticed it's part of the Actor Awards submissions. Growing Happiness.
Yes, Growing Happiness, as far removed from presidential assassins, is sunflower farmers from regional Queensland trying to save their dying town from a drought.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that too. So, Neil, how do you decide what films or documentaries or whatever? How do you decide what you make?
How I decide what I make, I always find and gravitate towards characters that are trying to achieve the impossible. Uh, that always kind of makes for good storytelling. I always look for underdog characters because I think that's a very universal thing, and I think that really speaks to all of us in whatever we do. Is that we are trying to better ourselves or do something that we want to change the world or ourselves or our communities. And identifying characters is always a key thing that I find is how I approach what that next project might be. And you sort of see this in Growing Happiness. Jane Russell was trying to save their town from a drought and put on a sunflower festival and connected to the Ukraine war of the national symbol, and obviously with cancer with one of the people there, and changed their small town and had a world impact. And in a similar but very different way with Hinckley, just simply trying to move on from his past of stalking Jodie Foster from an obsession with Taxi Driver and shooting the president, wanting to decouple his past and trying to move on from a career with his music. Those kinds of moments, I find it's the human experience. That speaks to all of us in different ways, and they aren't always comfortable conversations or feelings that we might always like, but it's the important conversation that betters the world. And the world is probably not in the greatest place at the moment. So why not have these films ask those questions, pose those? If it sparks conversations beyond the credits rolling, I think any film or art or documentary, if it can do that, I think it's done its job right.
Fair enough, fair comment. And just to conclude, Neil, are you planning another project at the moment?
I am. So Growing Happiness obviously comes out. Hinkley comes out on August 30 on Hinkley.movie. Growing Happiness is we've just released sold into Japan, and that's going to be released in Australia towards the end of the year.
Uh,
So that's consuming a little bit more bandwidth at the moment, and then we have a few other little, as they say, irons in the fire for a few other projects. So I'll say watch this space.
Watch the space. I like that. That sounds fine. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Neil. We've been speaking to Neil McGregor, who's the director of Hinckley, I Shot the President, which you can catch up with on the internet. It's on release at the end of August. Neil, thank you so much for talking with me.
Always a pleasure, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best.
You too.